On this episode of Comes with the Territory, the U.S. Virgin Islands remains on the European Council's list of non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes. What does this mean for the residents of the territory? Tax attorney Adam Marinelli is here to break it down.
Well, we're getting a new Attorney General.
Attorney General Ariel Smith recently resigned after 8 months in office. Governor Albert Bryan Jr. has appointed Deputy Attorney General Ian Clement as acting Attorney General, while the search for a permanent replacement is underway. We'll have more. Plus,
teachers are pretty much fed up with the behavior of the students.
Frustrated teachers at Lockhart K-8 walked off the job recently in response to disruptive student behavior. We'll have details on the response from the Department of Education. And later, this week's panel joins the conversation to analyze these issues and more. Comes with the Territory starts now. Welcome to Comes with the Territory. I'm Leslie Camis-Young. The Council of the European Union recently updated its list of places deemed non-cooperative on tax matters, and the territory remains included on that blacklist. The U.S. Virgin Islands is among the 12 jurisdictions on the EU tax blacklist announced on February 20th. In a press release announcing its updated list, the entity stated, "The Council regrets that these jurisdictions are not yet cooperative on tax matters and invites them to improve their legal framework in order to resolve the identified issues." The European Council also released a document outlining its conclusions on why each of the 12 jurisdictions made its tax blacklist. The Council concluded that the U.S. Virgin Islands does not apply any automatic exchange of financial information, has harmful preferential tax regimes, including the Economic Development Program, exempt companies, and the International Banking Center Regulatory Act, and has not committed to addressing these issues. A statement from Government House regarding the territory's status on the EU's list of non-cooperative tax jurisdictions said, "Governor Albert Bryan and his administration have vigorously lobbied against this unjust action since 2019 and continue to advocate for the USVI's removal from that list." Governor Bryan stated, "It is unacceptable for us to continue being treated like a foreign country separate and apart from the United States. In the area of territorial tax treatment especially, we continue to be treated inconsistently across the territories as a group." Other jurisdictions on the EU tax blacklist include American Samoa, Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, Fiji, Guam, Palau, Panama, Russia, Samoa, Trinidad and Tobago, and Vanuatu. The next revision of the list is scheduled for October 2024. In the studio with me to discuss EU implications for the U.S. Virgin Islands is attorney Adam Marinelli from BoltNagi law firm. Welcome to Comes with the Territory, Adam.
Thank you for having me.
So we like to break things down on the show and make it as simple as possible to discuss. And taxes are usually not one of those issues. So I know you got a tough job today, but briefly simplified, tell us about this EU tax blacklist and why it's relevant.
Sure. On its face, it probably comes across as sort of a complicated political thing that doesn't impact the normal people that we have. But it does have a trickle-down effect. And so the way that I like to sort of analogize it is, think of it as sort of kids playing marbles on the playground. And the EU and the United States have big groups of marbles, and little countries like us, or little territories like us, don't have a lot of marbles. Mm-hmm. The big usually bullies the small. And that's kind of what's happening here. We've got the European Union trying to stop its tax base from eroding, so to speak. They want to keep as many marbles in their pot as they can. And they can sort of lean on the little guy, and that's what's happening.
Well, that was a great analogy. Of course, growing up, marbles in the Virgin Islands is a big thing, so I totally get what you're saying. But why did they say that the U.S. Virgin Islands is now on the updated list as well?
So there's several factors at play here. I think primarily the big ones are tax transparency issues, and then obviously our economic development incentives that we have. So the problem with a small territory like the Virgin Islands is that our economy is very small, and it requires sort of an influx of external capital to maintain its operations. And to do that, our government wisely implements economic incentives to bring companies to the territory, to do business here, to invest in the territory. And the blacklist has a huge dampening effect on that foreign investment. It prevents European investors, for example, from relocating here or bringing capital here because ultimately they'll end up being taxed more heavily than they would if they had not done so. So it does have a direct impact on our economy, and it is a problem that I think that needs to be addressed for sure.
Give us a little history, if you can, of the USVI and the EU tax list, EU blacklist, going back to about 2017 or so.
Sure, yeah. So the Code of Conduct group that was created by the EU sort of established a framework and implemented standards to impose criteria upon, at the time, I think it was about 92 jurisdictions that they had identified that were potentially non-compliant. The history was in March of 2018, we were identified as one of the 12 at the time being non-compliant. And I think, like I said earlier, the primary issues that we were sort of identified for were basically tax transparency issues, and then ultimately our economic incentives created, in their mind, what would be considered a tax haven.
Sure.
It's truly not the case, though. And I have sublime confidence in both sort of our current administration and our Representative Plaskett that has to work with the State Department and the Treasury to try to fix the situation.
Now, what impacts, and we'll get back to how it's perceived versus the reality, because we all know the EDC legislation was created by Congress itself to help, the territory at the time begin to diversify and develop its economy. But let's speak specifically to the impact this has on the U.S. government due to its continued presence. What does that really mean? And does it, when you say trickle-down effect in your first answer, how does it affect the average business owner?
Sure. So, like I said, looking back at the analogy of the marbles, liquidity with respect to our banks is a direct line to the economic benefits that we see from foreign investments. When the banks receive investments from these foreign investors, for example, the liquidity flows a little bit better, and you get probably more mortgages going out, more lending, and then more development, more buildings are built, more developments are added to the territory. So the economic impact is also related to jobs. Those types of investments create jobs as well. Less Virgin Islanders are being hired to build those developments and to work in those structures. So it becomes a directly impactful issue that I think should be addressed.
Now, let's talk a little bit. You had confidence, you just said, in the current administration and Delegate Plaskett working with the State Department. If you can, walk us through exactly the road they would take to help rectify this issue. And what are the legal arguments, most importantly, that we would make as a territory to help get us off this list? Sure.
I think Governor Bryan nailed it when he said, we shouldn't be treated as a foreign jurisdiction, right? We are under the auspices of the United States government, which already has existing tax treaties with the European Union. We don't actually have the legal authority or the right to negotiate on our own behalf. So Governor Bryan and Representative Plaskett and their respective cabinets have to go through the channels of the federal government to get this situation addressed. And so the State Department, the Department of Treasury, for example, those are the entities that will be going to bat for us with the European Union. And again, you got two bullies basically sort of now going at it. The United States is not akin to its own sort of pressures when it comes to foreign tax investments. The IRS treats foreign-controlled corporations pretty strictly as well. But because we are in that sort of unique situation where we can't negotiate on our own behalf, and our economic incentives were, as you said, created by Congress for the sole purpose of sort of developing what is, for lack of a better term, an emerging economy. I mean, we're very small in nature compared to the European Union. So we need those incentives to draw that investment to the territory.
So would it be worthwhile, you think, for local businesses to lobby local government and lobby Delegate Plaskett and say, this is something that we want you to do? Or does the lobbying have to take place on a higher level where it's our representatives meeting with other members of Congress, meeting with staff at the State Department to help rectify this issue?
So there are some things that we could do locally. I think that there are sort of infrastructure with the VIBIR, for example, that could add to our levels of tax transparency.
Yes.
Information sharing is one of the criterion that the EU imposes for these non-cooperative lists. And I think that we could do a better job, perhaps, of sort of working with the EU to share the information that they're after. But ultimately, this is in the hands of the federal government. So the State Department and the Department of Treasury and those high-level federal officials are the ones that are going to be the ones to get us off the blacklist.
You think it's a priority for them, or how do we manage to make it on their list? Because like you said, we're a small territory, the smallest of all the territories, just about. How do we, get in front of their faces and say, hey guys, this is affecting us, our economy. We need this taken care of. Yeah,
there's no question about it. The territories are often sort of left in the background of the conversation a lot of the time. But I think that they have taken notice. I mean, there's definitely work being done in the background for getting us off the blacklist, because it is important that the United States' treaties with EU are being respected, and the territories are a part of those treaties. So from a general diplomacy standpoint, and again, I'm not a political expert, or I'm not involved in any of these types of high-level conversations, but I would imagine that there is sort of a tit-for-tat trade negotiation going on for how we treat European investments in the United States versus how they need to be treating the insular territories.
Very interesting. Anything else you think the viewers should know about this particular topic that would be helpful for their understanding of the issue?
It is important to the territory because, like I said, it has a direct impact on our economy, and we need foreign investment because it spurs job growth, it spurs investment in the territory, and it'll create opportunities for local Virgin Islanders. But I'll leave you with a quote that's always imbued in my practice as a tax attorney, which is there's only two things certain in life, and it's death and taxes.
That's a good one.
So somebody's going to get their money, and whether it's the European Union or it's the BIR and the federal government, we will find out.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out to help explain this pretty complex topic, but you did a great job in helping our viewers, break it down into simple pieces. Up next, we'll hear from this week's Power Panel, but first, let's take a look at the topics on the table.
I respect Ariel Smith. I really, really like her a lot. But we have a difference of approach, so we part company.
Governor Albert Bryan Jr. parted company with his Attorney General Ariel Smith less than a year after she officially assumed the role of heading the Department of Justice. In a letter to the governor, Smith wrote, "Per your specific request and based on my conversation with Chief Knight on March 11, 2024, I submit this letter of resignation effective Friday, March 15, 2024. I thank you for the opportunity to be of service to my community in the capacity of Attorney General for the past 8 months." Pressed by the media to explain the circumstances surrounding Smith's departure, Bryan would only say,
When I part ways with someone is when philosophically they're not aligned with what I think the administration should be aligned with.
The governor declined to specify the reasons for the misalignment. He appointed Deputy Attorney General Ian Clement as acting Attorney General. Most recently, Clement represented the governor before the VI Supreme Court in a lawsuit over changes to WAPA's governing board that reduced it from 9 to 7 members and cut the number of cabinet appointees from 3 to 1. Clement argued that the WAPA board changes violated the separation of powers and hindered the governor's duties.
Are you suggesting that somehow the governor has the authority to supervise the WAPA board?
Part of his function to supervise all executive branches, agencies.
Hold on just one cotton picking minute. Look at what it says here.
I am really missing a lot from this argument, I think. The question is, how do you know they are experts? And your answer is because they go before the legislature?
Seems to me like you're trying to pull at straws to somehow justify, the argument.
With Clement serving as acting AG, The governor's office said it will announce a plan for a permanent replacement for Smith in the coming weeks. Smith was appointed to Attorney General last year after Governor Bryan fired then Attorney General Denise George shortly after her office sued J.P. Morgan Chase in connection with the Department of Justice's investigation of sex offender Jeff Epstein. J.P. Morgan eventually settled the claims by agreeing to pay $75 million to the Virgin Islands. Epstein's victims filed a lawsuit alleging that the Virgin Islands government officials facilitated Epstein's operation. The lawsuit implicates several high-ranking officials, including former Governor John DeYoung Jr., his wife Cecile DeYoung, former Governor Kenneth Mapp, former Attorney General Vincent Frazier, Delegate to Congress Stacey Plaskett, and former Senators Celestino White Sr. and Carlton Dow. Teachers at Lockhart School on St. Thomas walked off the job recently in response to disruptive student behavior that has resulted in some teachers being harassed and even one being attacked, according to the union president and two teachers who took part in the unsanctioned job action.
The teachers are pretty much fed up with the behavior of the students at the school. There are, a few repeat offenders that are disruptive, rude, and violent. 3 students had followed a teacher home, threatening to harm him. One teacher had gotten attacked at school, whereas her glasses were broken. She had to restrain the student, and they feel as though nothing has been put in place to make them feel safe in school.
While not endorsing the walkout, Jones said the St. Thomas-St. John Federation of Teachers acknowledged the seriousness of the situation. 2 teachers who wished to remain anonymous voiced concern with being threatened by students and parents, a lack of discipline when students misbehave, insufficient staff to include only 3 school monitors for 1,000 students, and overcrowded classrooms that are not conducive to learning. The March 13th walkout prompted a swift response from the Virgin Islands Department of Education. Commissioner Dion Wells-Hendrington met with faculty and pledged to work on solutions. In a written statement, she said, "In hearing the concerns of the teachers, we understand the severity of the issues presented. Disruptive behavior not only interrupts the learning process, but also undermines the safety and well-being of students and educators. The school's administration will work with faculty, staff, and district personnel to develop a plan to address reoccurring behavioral concerns. While teachers have since returned to classrooms, solutions are still under development."
There are some structural things that need to be put in place to assist the teachers at Lockhart with this ongoing disciplinary issue with these students. But it needs to happen like ASAP, because the teachers are frustrated. You cannot teach when you have kids disrupting your class. That's not what they were trained to do. That's not what they're paid to do. They're paid to teach the students and not break up fights and not fear for their lives when they're in the classroom.
Joining the panel discussion from our St. Croix studio is former Senator Kurt Violet and attorney Key Walker, founder and managing attorney at the Walker Legal Group on St. Croix. Welcome to the show, Mr. Violet and attorney Walker. And joining comes with the territory virtually, we have Janika Simon, editor of the Virgin Islands Consortium. It's great to have you back on the panel. Thank you for being here, all of you. Let's start with you, Janika, diving right into the topic of the resignation of Attorney General Ariel Smith. You had the opportunity to question Governor Bryan about the Attorney General's departure, and I must say for a lot of Virgin Islanders it came as a surprise, given that this is now our 3rd Attorney General. You think such a crucial post in a cabinet is one we want to maintain some consistency, but yet here we are. What was the response that Governor Bryan gave to you?
Well, I was the second person to ask about this. He gave my first colleague, who was actually in the room with him, a pretty non-committal answer, saying it was philosophical differences. And he basically, said the same to me when I tried to press that there was a difference in approach between Ms. Smith and where his administration wanted to go but he really did not delve into, what the difference of opinion was, or why, two attorneys general in a row have left prior to the expiration of their tenures.
Senator Violet, there's a ton of speculation, and all we can do is speculate, given that former Attorney General Smith hasn't made any public statements regarding her resignation outside of her resignation letter. But, this is one of those things where the system and how we select an Attorney General and the position itself inherently is appointed by a governor. The debate, once again, of electing an Attorney General to avoid situations like this is once again in the air. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on the issue.
First, let me begin by saying that the Organic Act prohibits us from being able to elect an Attorney General. So we'd have to go through that process by establishing our own constitution or sending a resolution to Congress asking them to change the Organic Act so that we can elect someone. But I think a lot of people are to that point now where they're saying that we need a position to be elected. It's unfortunate that this current Attorney General has left that particular position because there's a need for stability in that office. As we saw in the Daily News, there was an article about the backlog of cases in reference to filings. And we really need somebody that is going to be in the office and provide some type of continuity. It is unfortunate that you hear at this juncture that there are philosophical differences. That should have been worked on before that individual was selected to the position. So I'm hoping that the next person that comes into the position would be one that is philosophically in sync with the governor and that will be able to provide some stability and deal with the tremendous backlog and get these cases moving.
Attorney Walker, let me come to you. To Mr. Violet's point, the people's business and the backlog of cases that are happening as a result of resignation after resignation is really beginning to take a toll on the people's business getting done. What is your, perspective on why this is happening? Let me start there, and how we could work things out in the future. What can the administration do possibly to not find itself at this crossroad again before it comes to its eventual end?
I don't believe the turnover in the Attorney General position is the cause of the backlog. So I somewhat disagree with that premise because the Attorney General is an administrator and a manager at the end of the day. The Attorney General rarely appears in court or litigates cases. There's a team of attorneys in the Department of Justice who's responsible for that. And a lot of the backlog that we're currently experiencing is because we were under COVID. The courts are now having trials, and these attorney generals are finding themselves, especially the ones in the criminal division, in trial after trial after trial as the court works to catch up. But with regards to, the turnover and what that means, I don't know what the reason is for the recent resignation of this Attorney General, but fundamentally, the Attorney General represents the people of the Virgin Islands and the government of the Virgin Islands. And to the extent that the governor is the representative of the government of the Virgin Islands, who the Attorney General has to meet with, confer with, sometimes take instruction from, as any attorney would any client, if there is a philosophical difference, if there's a difference in strategy or priorities, then that would result in a change in the AGs, just like any other attorney-client relationship. So I think that, once that arises, I don't think the governor really has a choice but to make a change to make sure that the priorities that he sets for the government are being followed.
Ms. Simon, I'm going to come back to you. I certainly agree with what Attorney Walker just said, in that the governor, given the system of law that we have, is the boss. He has the right to fire or hire an attorney general, and they serve at the pleasure of the governor as well as other members of his cabinet. But some would argue that when it comes to justice, this is one of those areas, and personally I believe education, emergency management, and police should also be involved, where when a professional is hired to do a job, they should be able to act outside of the realm of politics per se. To former Senator Violet's point, we would have to literally change our system or petition Congress to be able to elect an attorney general, who then would also have the power of the people behind them, since they would be an elected representative. How do you feel about that? And have any of your readers voiced their opinion on that topic?
Well, I just want to amplify something that Mr. Viole had said, which is that philosophical differences or the idea of philosophical differences may or might or should perhaps have come up prior to her appointment only 8 months ago. So when you are evaluating an addition to your team, especially as Ms. Smith is not an unknown quantity. She was chief of, I believe, the civil division before she was appointed. We had Ms. George leave the position. Wouldn't, or some of my of the readers would think that these kinds of conversations, strategy, philosophy, where are we going with these huge high-profile cases would have been discussed prior. So people are not necessarily accepting the difference of opinions rationale that was given. Whether people would prefer to have an elected AG has not really been discussed extensively on the platform. I think that my readers are still trying to process actually the departure of Ms. Smith, even now several days later, and also trying to process the appointment in an acting capacity, at least, of Mr. Clemens.
Let me come back to you, Attorney Walker, because I would like your legal perspective on this. We read recently that the Attorney General's office was representing in one of the most recent Epstein victims lawsuit former Governor Kenneth Mapp and former Attorney General Vincent Frazier. However, there were other members of the government that were not represented by the AG's office, and it is unclear why they were representing just 2 members versus other constitutional office holders like a sitting senator in Carlton Dow and former Governor John DeYoung. Do you have any insights on that?
I don't have any insights on that, but I must say that I found it strange. The Department of Justice has been confronted in the past with having multi-defendant cases, and it has to be very careful when it represents multiple defendants in one case, and it has to institute what's essentially called a Chinese wall that allows for these multiple representations, and they've done that in the past. It's not clear to me why Department of Justice elected to represent 2 and not the others. I don't have any firsthand knowledge as to why, so I really can't pass a judgment on that. But it did strike me as odd that they elected to represent only 2.
Senator Viole, initially the office of the AG was representing just Mapp and Frazier, I'm being told, but the other members weren't represented by the Attorney General's office. Now, logically, some people might just elect to have their own counsel because they feel that, their own counsel may work best. But similar question to you, do you have any insights on why the disparity in representation by the AG's office?
I don't, but I found it very, very strange that that took place. We'd have to speculate as to whether or not that could be one of the reasons for the philosophical differences that existed between the Attorney General and the Governor of the Virgin Islands. But I found the whole situation strange, and perhaps it needed to be given a full explanation by the Department of Justice as to why they were proceeding in the manner. I mean, it can always be that the other parties wanted to have their own counsel, but some type of explanation needed to be had. And I think that the vague explanation of philosophical differences is what has everybody up in air right now in terms of, well, what really took place? We saw a dismissal last year, January, and now we had somebody new, and once again, we have a dismissal, and now somebody has been selected that is a rep for the WAPA case. Could that have been the philosophical difference? So there's a lot out there in the air that we need to have cleared up. And just using vague terms, that doesn't really quell that particular situation.
As you saw in the clip we played earlier, the current acting Attorney General Ian Clement was before the Supreme Court on March 12th, representing the governor who claims that reducing WAPA's governing board from 9 to 7 members and cutting the number of cabinet appointees from 3 to 1 violates the separation of powers. Let's play another clip from Clement's oral arguments.
Couldn't the legislature have removed all 3 of the governor's commissioners?
They could have. We'd be making a different argument.
Why is it to be faulted since it left 1?
Well, as a practical matter, the problem here, and the quarrel is not with that individual person. I mean, there is a quarrel with that, but it's a separate issue as to the removal of cabinet members and then the other 6 only being removed for cause. When you couple all that together, it does constrain the oversight of the supervision of the board. And while WAPA is autonomous, it is not private. And as a practical matter, it does depend upon the government. You take, for example, the lead water crisis in St. Croix.
What does that have to do with construing the statute, whether or not it violates the separation of powers?
Because
you're talking about a board for a public corporation, so to speak. What difference it makes? I don't understand your argument, to tell you the truth.
Attorney Walker, I know that in the media sometimes we may select a clip that tries to drive home a point, but that clip we just played doesn't instill a great deal of confidence. And I will be fair and say we all have bad days. We all have moments where we're not at our best. It happens to all of us. But just now, if that is the representation that we see, and do you know Attorney Clement at all? Do you have an opinion on the job that he may do as the new Attorney General? But seeing the oral arguments just now didn't instill a whole bunch of confidence.
I mean, I'm familiar with Attorney Clement, and I have nothing negative to say about his performance as an attorney, but I do think we make a big mistake here in the Virgin Islands. There's this belief that the best engineer at Public Works should be the commissioner, or that the best attorney out there should be the AG. And at the end of the day, the AG, the commissioners are all administrators. If you're running a private business and you have a hotshot trial attorney, you're not going to make that trial attorney the person who runs the firm. You're going to send that attorney to court. So I say that to say how Attorney Clement may have performed in the clip that was just shown, and whether he can, on an interim basis or permanent basis, be a good administrator or leader for the department, I think are 2 separate skill sets, and we can't pass a judgment on him as an AG based on this one section of his performance in one case.
And I think that's very fair, and that's why I preface the question the way I did. Let me ask you, Senator Viale, former Senator Viale, do you know Attorney Clement as well? Do you have an opinion on the job that he may do as Attorney General?
I don't know him personally, but I'm hoping that whoever is selected to be the next Attorney General will be one that serves out the duration of the governor's term, and one that is philosophically in sync with the governor. It is time for us to have some stability in that particular department, and it's just not a good look that we are running through Attorney Generals. It is not a good look, and it doesn't lead to any stability or continuation of any particular projects or restructuring or anything of the matter. So there's a need for a strong individual who's a good administrator to be in that position, that's going to be able to get Department of Justice moving in the right direction, because there have also been an ex-complaint that they have lost a number of employees, a number of separations because of philosophical disagreements between the AG, the last one, this one, and those individuals that are working in the office. So at some point, we got to get it together.
Absolutely. Janika, to Mr. Viale's point, actually going back into the last administration, I think we had 3 attorney generals in that administration as well. So this has been a position where we're seeing repetitive turnover and differences of opinions that are causing disruptions. I think in the last administration, we had an attorney general serve for just 6 weeks, I believe. What are your readers saying about this topic in terms of the turnover?
Well, people are concerned, Leslie, about the parade of attorneys general in that top spot. But if I could draw your attention to something in particular, and I think this widens the conversation a little bit. And I noticed former Senator Viale has been repeating the philosophical differences line. And I think that the clips that we just saw actually may give us some clues as to where those philosophical differences may lie. You would have heard Chief Justice Hodge and the other panel, justices on the panel, express confusion at the arguments that Mr. Clement was making. They did not understand the arguments. They obviously found it difficult to agree with him that the legislature making adjustments to the board composition was an imposition on the executive, the exercise of executive power. So could we have a case, and I remember with former Attorney General George, the governor was very upset at her filing of the suit against J.P. Morgan. So could we have a situation where attorneys general may be doing things in their best legal practice or understanding, and we have an administration which is trying to push suits or push a disagreement with the legislature through the courts, but that is not necessarily predicated on solid legal and strong legal arguments. So I'm just throwing that out there for discussion, for some consideration by the audience tonight.
Very good point as well. Governor Bryan said he will announce plans for a permanent replacement for Ariel Smith in coming weeks. Meanwhile, Supreme Court Justice nominee Harold Willox has made a suggestion of his own. In between thank yous for his recent hearing before the Senate Rules Committee, Willox took a moment to pitch his pick for the next Attorney General. Let's take a look.
I would like to just, if I may, take an opportunity to thank, firstly, of course, my wife, Yvette Willox, of course, Attorney Joseph Pontine, who hopefully might be a candidate for the Attorney General's office.
You made your pitch in the wrong court for the next Attorney General. I think you need to make that pitch at Government House.
I'm going to go to the experienced legislator on this one. That was a little bit of an interesting moment there where, you know, in the midst of his nomination hearing and being before the legislature, he was making a pitch for the next Attorney General. I'm really interested to hear, have you seen this before, Mr. Viale, and what are your thoughts on what we just played?
You know, I'm just hearing it for the first time, and I'm a bit surprised. I think it wasn't really appropriate for a Supreme Court justice to be making a pitch for who's going to be the next Attorney General. You know, there's a separation of power. Department of Justice falls under central government, and he's actually under the attorneys, the court system. So I think it's a bit strange and inappropriate to make a recommendation. I do know Attorney Pontine, and I think he's highly qualified and he's a very, very good individual. But I would have rather that that was not said on the floor of the Senate.
Let me ask you, Keith, from a legal perspective. Let's just say Mr. Pontine, Attorney Pontine does become the next Attorney General. If in the rare case, and we know Attorney Generals rarely go before the Supreme Court for anything, but if indeed he were to, and let's just say Judge Willox is a sitting Supreme Court justice, in a situation like that, would the individuals or entities on the opposite side of the argument ask for recusal because of this show of favoritism?
I mean, they could. Realistically, though, I don't really think that argument would carry much water, only because Judge Willox has demonstrated himself over the years to be a very fair judge. I can personally say that I represented an individual who was adverse to a member of Judge Willox's family, and I still appeared before Judge Willox without issue. I had a trial before him as recently as last week, and I considered him to be very fair. So I think he made an offhand comment. I agree with Senator Viola. It wasn't the most appropriate comment to make and a very inappropriate place to make it. But I don't, to establish recusal, you would have to have more to support a claim for recusal than the offhand comment that the soon-to-be justice made.
Janika, going back to the point that Senator Viola made about the inappropriateness of that, what do you think about his opinion that it wasn't quite the time and place to be pitching for the next Attorney General?
Leslie, I think I may be the wrong person to ask that question because as a reporter, I live for the theater of it all. So
that was an honest answer.
Yeah, to me, a former legislator like Mr. Viola may quite rightly say that it was not, the appropriate forum. A legal professional like Ms. Walker would definitely have a legal opinion, but for me, I get my kicks from seeing all of the the ad hoc moments. It really is entertaining for me, and so I laughed to myself when I was reviewing that remark. And I think it's just part of the churn of the Senate process, the committee hearings, and especially for nomination hearings, they're a little bit more free, they're a little bit more open, a little more relaxed than when a bill is on the floor or something like that. So for me, it was just a lighthearted moment.
Key, I'm going to give you an opportunity to give Ms. Simon a media moment. Who do you think should be the next Attorney General? And if you don't have your mind set on an individual, what are the qualities that the governor should be looking for in his next Attorney General?
I mean, honestly, he needs to identify a leader that the individuals within the department will respect. He needs to identify an individual who would put systems in place so that you don't find the errors, the clerical errors that have been happening. He needs an individual who can lead a team and develop a team and make them fair. I recently had a case with the Attorney General's office last week in front of Judge Willits. And in the first time in my entire career, I got a directed verdict on all charges, which means that the judge determined that the government failed so miserably in its case that he couldn't even send it to a jury. And that is a very rare thing to happen. And that should never happen, because if your case is so weak, you don't even bring it to trial, or you make sure you develop your case so that you can at least get your case before a jury. So the next AG really needs to be a leader who can really run that department.
Recently, we had an unsanctioned job action at the Lockhart K-8 school over students' disruptive behavior. And you saw the clip that we played. We have teachers now in our system that are fearing for their safety, and students following teachers home and threatening them. I'm going to come to you, Mr. Viola, as a former principal and educator. When you got news of this, how did that make you feel? And is this something that, as someone who spent so many years in education, that you have seen us eventually coming to? And if so, how do we abate this situation in the future? Because to me, this is where we need to draw the line in the sand. This is an elementary school. A middle school for all intents and purposes, because it goes to 8th grade. We have students threatening teachers and following them home.
And we got to keep in mind that this is a K-8 environment, kinder to 8th grade. And to have these type of issues where teachers are feeling threatened, where students are following teachers home, I just can't imagine what's going to happen to those individuals, those students, when they become high school students. But we need to create a safe environment in all of the schools, and it requires very, very strict rules and regulation. And for some reason, we have moved away from having rules and regs in the school and literally telling students what they need to do on a regular basis in order to provide a conducive environment for education. I think that there's a need for a meeting of all administrators where you're going to have to outline exactly what policies and procedures they are going to follow to make sure that the environment is safe. It is the job of the school administrator to make sure that our schools are safe. But sadly, what we're seeing is a reflection of the community. We continue to accept bad behavior. We continue to accept individuals doing what they want. We turn our head. We say we don't want to intervene. And now it's spilling into the schools. But we need to send a strong message. And I haven't heard the message yet, but a strong message needs to be sent, or we're going to continue to have an exodus of teachers because they feel that the environment isn't safe. So my recommendation would be to have strong rules of recommendation, immediately implement them, let the public know what are the do's and the don'ts when they go to school as a parent, when they send a child to school. And we need to make sure that that disciplined environment exists in every single educational institution.
I agree with you, but I'm going to come to you, Ms. Simon, on this question. We can instill discipline inside the schools, but if there's no discipline in the homes, this is where you see this type of behavior. And if you listen to the piece that we played before about this situation, it talked about parents also being involved in the threatening of teachers. I'm curious to hear what the viewers and readers of the consortium have said about this issue.
Well, Leslie, people are extremely concerned. People are noticing the breakdown in discipline. In fact, we've had reporting in the consortium going back several years. And I'm looking at this that I pulled up from 2022, September 3rd, 2022, the Department of Education, this is the headline, Department of Education says parental involvement needed to curb violence among youth. So the uptick in violence activities and the breakdown in discipline is not something new. I think that the incident at Lockhart is just the latest alarm bell that the territory has heard in terms of student behavior. We have had fights on campuses, and yes, Mr. Viola is correct that this is, an incident among much younger people. But this is not a new phenomenon, and I think that more than a message, a strategy and concrete tactics need to be developed and implemented to curb antisocial behavior in our classrooms and school campuses.
Recently, there has been the unannounced lockdown of campuses in the territory, Attorney Walker, where monitors and police officers or law enforcement officers have been involved in conducting searches of campuses because things have gotten to the point where that is what is needed to find weapons, to find contraband, to find illegal drugs, which have all been found on high school campuses. But to see this at the K-8 level is a bit alarming, and it is indicative of behavior to come, one would say. But one thing that has not been, I haven't heard discussed in the community is the sanctions for the students and possibly parents who perpetrated this. I haven't heard how these students are going to be handled in the future.
And, neither have I, Leslie, but I think we have actually a national problem because the incidents of school violence aren't only happening here, they're happening all over the country. And I think it's raising an issue as to what will our public schools look like? Are we going to have public schools that are heavily monitored with a strong police presence? Is that conducive to a learning environment? I don't know the answers to these questions. And I was actually happy that Senator Viola was here because, he definitely has more knowledge than I in this instance. I don't know, outside of an expulsion, I don't know what other sanction could be given to a student unless they're charged criminally. But I don't know if schools should be in the business of filing complaints against students that, such that students end up in the criminal justice system. I just think our society continues to become more violent. Everyone's favorite show happens to be Power for some reason, which is a show about violence. And I just think that children are being exposed to these things at a younger and younger age, and they're demonstrating these behaviors at school.
Interesting point that you make. By the way, I've never seen an episode of Power. The Senate Committee on Economic Development and Agriculture recently considered a bill by Senator Franklin Johnson to restructure the Division of Festivals by eliminating the assistant director position and replacing them with director positions for each island. Here's more.
The bill proposed increase the number of directors from 1 to 3. Stipulating that each director must reside on the island they are appointed to serve. This residency requirement ensures that festival leadership is deeply rooted in their communities.
Appointing a director for each island would further improve the cultural and festival experience, transparency, equity, and accountability.
Let St. Croix handle our business. St. John, you handle your carnival, your festival. St. Thomas, you do that.
This new bill infringes on the executive branch's ability to manage its operations, staffing, and departmental practices. As a department, we stand firm in the belief of one band, one sound, which signifies the strength and the impact of the current structure.
I offer us working together. And if we have one territorial person and an individual assistant director that focuses on their island, I'm still trying to figure out what the issue is. This is starting to sound like more like trying to divide St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix again.
It's very important to understand. I've said this to the team. Parity is important. And unless you are a Crucian or a St. Jonian or a St. Thomian living on the respective islands, you do not know what the day-to-day challenges may be or how we may feel as a people. So, with all due respect, my stance is not to divide. My stance is to strengthen, but it is important that we do not downplay or put aside how Crucians feel.
Now, the bill ultimately failed to move out of committee due to lack of support, but having seen what we just played, Senator Villalay, what is your take on this seemingly disagreement in the leadership at the Division of Festivals?
Presently, the way that the festival division is structured, you have one person that's the territorial director, and then you have 3 individuals that are assistant director. This bill literally just eliminates the territorial director position and make all of the 3 positions a director position for each of the islands, with that individual reported to the Commissioner of Education. The Commissioner of Tourism, I'm sorry, just working with education. So it literally didn't change a lot, but it just made sure that each island had their own director to provide parity for the island, to provide more flexibility in making decisions, but the final person would still be the commissioner. So I think it was something that was needed. It provides parity. I don't see how it creates any type of division. It actually saves money because they eliminate one particular position, and it would make each island feel that they have a true say as to how the festival or carnival or the St. John celebration is going to be structured and run. So I think it was a good bill.
Key, what are your thoughts on the discussion that was just had, that we just aired on the floor of the legislature? Do we need to go to the proposed structure, or is the current structure fine?
You know, Leslie, there are just some things that don't need legislating. And then this is one of them. We just finished talking about violence at school.
Correct.
And now we're spending a whole bunch of time on whether we should have a territorial director. I filed this under something that I really don't care about, because I don't think it warrants this much attention, and it certainly doesn't warrant legislation. Just let the Department of Tourism do what it does best. There's no reason to interfere at this level.
I could not agree more. In fact, I will even take it way further. I would say no festival and no fete until we raise our standardized test scores in schools and we can assure that our children can go to school safely. I'm going to come to you, Ms. Simon. What are your perceptions about this infighting, and specifically the discussion on parity, which is a reoccurring theme we see throughout so many issues? It seems here that individuals on St. Croix don't feel that they're getting the representation that they should with our festivals.
Well, Leslie, I think there are a couple of issues here, and you have the tension again between legislative and executive branches that we also saw in the WAPA lawsuit. You have the issue of parity, which is a recurring one in the territory, where Crucians often feel that although they have the big island, they are overlooked somewhat when it comes to administration and administrative activities. I tend to agree with Ms. Walker in that some things don't necessarily need legislation. And in the article that we published on the bill's failure, our readership was also of that opinion, that this was not something that should be given too much priority by our senators. There are other things that the territory desperately needs to focus on, and that should be that.
Ms. Ariel, I'm going to come to you for a final word. What do you think ultimately happens here at the Division of Festivals regarding this issue?
Well, I just wanted to clear up that the Division of Festival was created by the legislature. So any changes to the Division of Festival must come through the legislature. Mm-hmm. And it might be significant in the bigger scheme of things. You look at healthcare, education, etc., and this is a bit insignificant, but it's important to the people of St. Croix. And you're hearing the cry out there in the streets on a regular basis. You heard it among the boot owners, you heard it among the entertainers, you heard it among the calypsonians. So you just can't sit and not do anything. And when you amend bills, it's an attempt to create a better structure. And hopefully this bill would have created a better structure. At the end of the day, it failed, so they're back to the drawing table.
Key, we got about 2 minutes left on the show. Do you think that, to Senator Villa's point, since if we're going to make changes, we got to go back to the legislative body that created the entity to make those changes. Do you think that ultimately, the bill didn't get support to move out of committee, but what do you think happens here? Do we make the change?
I just don't see why it's necessary. I think just let the Division of Festivals run. I am appreciative that that division was formed. I think that was a great idea, worthy of legislation. But as far as micromanaging the structure and how it operates, I think you can just leave that to the Department of Tourism.
One more quick point, if I can,
sure.
if we have time.
Go ahead.
There are about 30 employees working for Division of Tourism. On St. Croix, we have 4 employees. We presently don't have an assistant director of festivals. Shamari Haynes was promoted to be an assistant director. So deputy commissioner. So we have a very limited number of individuals on St. Croix to focus on the tourism product. And that creates a problem. You have a commissioner, 1 other individual, and 2 individuals that are assigned to the Division of Festivals. So that in itself is a problem.
That's a very good point. That's all the show we have for you today, but be sure to tune in next Sunday at 1 p.m. for an all-new episode of Comes with the Territory. In the meantime, for your news updates, tune into WTJX's news feed on weekdays at 5 p.m. on 93.1 FM or by downloading the WTJX app. I'm Leslie Comisiong. For all of us here at WTJX Channel 12, take care.